Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 4th season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from the Star Wars Universe podcast.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about Minute 104, which begins with Sif and Frigga talking about Thor and ends with Thor telling Odin he has much to learn, that Thor, he himself, has much to learn. And joining us on the show today, as every day this week, is Will Freeland from the Hype Is My Superpower podcast. And Will, good day in the morning. Happy Thor's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day, and so we always celebrate the great man Thor on his great day by asking, what is your favorite Thor moment? And this can be from a comic book, a movie, a cereal box, which, by the way, I say that often. There is a Thor cereal. You can Google it. I think it's created as a joke, but it's out there, Thorios. So yeah, what is your, from any source whatsoever, a Lego movie, a Lego video game, what is your favorite Thor moment ever?
Oh dear, favorite Thor moment? That's God King Thor fighting the Black Winter. So we have King Thor with the All-Father powers, also using the power cosmic and teaming up kind of with Galactus to fight the Black Winter, which we find out is the reason why the previous universe was destroyed and this universe started, was because the Black Winter decided it. So it's Thor going up against a very primordial old being. And I lost my mind reading that comic.
Wow.
I have the sense of like I love that these comics exist. It's one more reason I'm so happy for your podcast, because I don't think I could get through that comic. I think my mind would just explode into like all the metaphysics.
Oh my gosh.
No idea. So I'm so glad you're there to love it. And it sounds like a fantastic moment that I want to see in a movie one day, because that's not terribly esoteric. I'm sure you can make that relatable characters. Absolutely. Well, getting Will's thoughts on that, a whole lot more right after this.
Want to wear some Marvel Movie Minute inspired clothing? Well, head over to our online store. You can see what we have over there. Go to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and click on merch.
All right, so we open this minute with, again, that motif of women watching Thor walk away. This time it is Sif and Frigga, although very quickly it is just their voices as we watch Thor walking, which I think is a very powerful thing. And Frigga asks Sif, how is he doing? And then Sif tells him, that he mourns for his brother. And then she says the thing about being in love with him. He misses the mortal. There's so much going on between these two characters. What do you get out of this scene?
I thought it was Frigga telling Sif what he's doing. I thought the dialogue was the opposite, but either way, it doesn't really change too much. As soon as they refer to Jane as the mortal, it sends my mind spiraling into this whole, like, are Asgardians as immortal, even though literally in this movie we have Odin, the lie that Odin is dead, and so arguably they're not immortal, but they just live a really long time. And then I think to like Ragnarok, and Odin does die, but because he's been cut off from his magic, I guess. I don't know. I would have preferred that they called her the Midgardian or the human,
right,
and not the mortal, because
it has connotations. Yeah,
implies a different. Yeah.
In the earlier comics, I know that when Odin discovered that Thor was interested in Jane, like, he was so put off that he would show any interest in a mere mortal, and so. The way that they say it, I'm like, are they dismissing her? And is there some shock and surprise that, like, he misses her? Immortal. They don't quite say it like that. I'm overemphasizing it, but still, it feels like, God, they feel so dismissive. And I find that to be an interesting way to kind of have the scene play out in this moment.
See, I guess this scene to me is also another big part of why I think of the Sif carrying the torch dynamic. Because to me, just to confirm, because I heard it differently and you don't see their faces, it is Sif who's giving that speech of, not the speech, but it's Sif who says, describes her as the mortal.
Yeah.
My bad. Yep.
Yeah, it's fine. You don't see their face. I definitely was confused the first time. I had to go back and listen to it again to make sure.
Yeah, and it is in the script that way, where Frigga asks Sif, how is he? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And to me, I think there's a couple of things going on. First of all, it is again Frigga confirming that the emotional intelligence of Sif, that Sif is the one to ask about how he's doing. But I guess I don't take it quite as dismissive. I think there is some level of that, but to me, there's so much pain in Sif's voice as she says this. And to me, it feels like she's not saying like, oh God, the mortal, how terrible. But it's more, there is some element of like, I can't understand how he could love a mortal. And with I think what is unspoken there is, instead of me to some extent, or at least instead of an Asgardian. And here's where I'm going to go off on just a complete like headcanon perhaps, but especially knowing everything I know from the mythology and also just what we know about the world of Asgard in general, I feel like what is being slightly implied here, and maybe we'll get more of in the fourth movie, or maybe Branagh thought we'd have more of it in the second if that happened. I get the sense that maybe kind of like in the way that, things are often planned out for princes and the like, that there was a sense of like Sif was going, like Thor and Sif were supposed to be together. Not even that they felt it, but like kind of like a betrothal almost of, kind of like Sif is the woman who's of his class and of his, part of this mighty warrior Asgardian culture. And then maybe even Sif had bought into that somewhat. And so that's, I guess, what I get more out of the mortal is that it's like, this is so far from what Thor was supposed to be doing.
If you take this and transpose it to a story in Old England, it's like saying, he misses her, the commoner, or something. It's like, it's like that sort of thing. It's like that, the peasant. It's like, again, I'm playing it up to be a little more dismissive than you're implying, but still, it's like, he misses somebody who's just not of us, and it just, I think that there is. If anything, there's an element of perhaps some confusion there. Like it's odd that this is the direction that our next king has decided to go. It's a peculiar step for him.
Definitely. Just from a movie making kind of standpoint, and Andy especially, I'm curious, what do you think why did they choose to have these very emotional lines that I think are so fundamental to both Frigga and Sif, but us not see them? They're being said as Thor's walking out to meet Odin. What's the choice there?
Well, I think there's an element of, if we show their face, we're seeing them have this conversation about Thor, but by showing Thor in this moment, he's kind of in shadows. He's distant from the camera as he walks through this massive hall toward his father, where he'll kind of get to at the end of this moment here. But it keeps him isolated, and so they're talking about Thor, and we're seeing Thor, and by putting him in such an isolated space where it is just kind of this dark shell of him walking, I don't know, I find that it further emphasizes kind of the point of what they're saying here. We just saw him leave. We saw how he looks so sad and distraught, and it emphasizes and amplifies everything that they're saying by kind of laying their audio over what we're seeing.
To me, part of what I think it conveys is just how different Thor is now, and Odin saw the problems with Thor, and I think to some extent so did Sif, although Frigga just, it seems like, is always the loving, doting mother. But Sif and Frigga quite liked the old Thor. And I think, there's that sense of just like, Thor's comeback changed, and we don't really know who he is anymore.
Yeah.
Just the simple fact that Frigga feels like she can't ask her own son, how are you doing? She has to ask Sif instead.
Yeah, there's definitely a less of that bonding between mother and son in this film than there is father and son in this film. I suppose that perhaps is a little more the way that this film was structured, is like, this is about fathers and sons, and so that's going to be our emotional focus. and so, yeah, I would have liked to think that Frigga could have asked him, but for the drive the story is taking us on, I definitely think that it makes more sense for her to kind of have that distance, so that we can have this moment here that we're about to have with Thor and Odin instead.
Right.
And that's just a last note on Frigga and Sif, but this is our picture wrap on Rene Russo and Jamie Alexander for the film. So they'll be back, but it's, it was nice seeing them in this one.
Especially because Jamie Alexander has always had a special place in my heart as the Sif character, but I do think this is part the actress is willing to do it. She was the first MCU movie actor who was willing to then or either was willing or was written into a Marvel TV show, because she shows up in
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., yeah, where I think it's kind of after the second Thor movie where like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are called in to kind of clean up on Midgard, and she was a part of it. So to me, there's always like, as someone who loves the Netflix MCU so much and some of the other TV shows, and is always kind of sad that the movie folks won't kind of, deign to step down and be on TV, although that's obviously changing with Disney Plus now. I always have a love of Jamie Alexander for doing that. So
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Thor and Odin. There's a lot that happens in this scene. There's one line that I'm not thrilled about. Audience, you get 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Because I think I've made my feelings pretty known. But even before we get to that, Thor kind of comes up to Odin, and we get this great shot of, like, they're not looking at each other. They're both just sort of looking out over the expanse of, what's out there. What are you picking up from this dynamic between the two of them?
I feel like it's portraying a character journey that Thor is implied to have gone on, that I think we only got to see parts of throughout the movie. But this is kind of one of those classic, son finally gets a taste of the trials that a father has to go through, or a king has to go through, and the decisions that he's got to make, the tough decisions, like letting your son fall into the black abyss. But I don't know. It's the lines are there, the emotion is there. I'm not 100% convinced that the journey was taken for Thor. The whole like learning humility thing, coming to Earth and all that kind of stuff. I think he took more of a hero's kind of journey and not like a humility journey, sacrificing himself at for the climactic battle, and that's how you become worthy. I don't know, but on its face, if this is the only minute that I've watched, or these 5 minutes are the only 5 minutes I've watched, I would have assumed a lot more happened with Thor than what we got to see in the movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of lines that we have here. And I mean, I feel like I can see your point a little bit. I don't know, having watched it this way, I guess I feel like Thor did kind of go on that journey. I find there to be elements in here that kind of show that. Could there have been more? Sure, but I still think that the journey was taken. I think the conversation that the two of them have is funny because, I mean, Odin, what he is saying to Thor, you'll be a wise king. Yeah, I think that's great. And when Thor says stuff like, I have much to learn, yes, that's still true. But I can't help but think, and Matthew, I know exactly where you're going with, there will never be a wiser king than you or a better father, that Thor says to Odin. Like, I can't help but wonder if, because, I mean, there's a lot of issues that we have here with kind of Odin as a king and a father. But I can't help but wonder if some of the line here is because it's coming very specifically from Thor, who just, I mean, we talked about, Odin's storytelling with, the Jotuns and everything, and how we're seeing it from the victor's point of view. And we're seeing this from the eldest son's point of view, and seeing the king as the wise king and the father as the great father, knowing full well that not all of that is true. But from Thor's perspective,
I think there's a couple of different ways to see it. And I was going to hold off on the, like, you're a good father moment, but we can actually dive into that a little more. I think, because I do think obviously a huge undercurrent of this is Thor to some extent saying like, thank you for banishing me. Like, you know, kind of that you were right to banish me. I needed that. And I get all that. And I want to talk about that more in a minute, but just in the like, you're and never a better father. Like, yeah, I think that to me, especially, I think, but probably to all of us, like that line feels so off because of everything that, you know, we've seen, and not even counting like the, you know, adios Loki, I don't care that you're upset moment that we have some different opinions on, but just, yeah, all the way back to like, one of you will be a king, but both of you could be, like a lot of the bad father moments we've seen. I wonder if Thor saying that makes more sense if I have the feeling that Odin is feeling like, did I fail Loki? You know, Loki is feeling that Odin is feeling a sense of, am I responsible? Because, like, I mean, I did counseling work, and I know that like one thing we did a lot of discussion of is, you know, if the person you're talking to has had a tragedy happen, even if they're somewhat responsible for that, like in the moment of grief is not when you say that to them, you know, like, so I feel like if the movie had given us just a little bit to think that Odin was feeling guilt in this moment, then Thor saying it, like, it's a kind of empty platitude that I don't think that I would think that not even Thor believes, but it would make sense that he says it in this moment when Odin is like, oh my God, did I just get my son killed? But because we don't have any of that, and I would have to just headcanon it just feels even worse to me, because it's like, Thor, you've seen so much evidence of what a bad father Odin was. And maybe it's because of the whole, like, Thor wants to take personal responsibility, and that saying Odin was a bad father would be saying that maybe it's not his fault that he was so screwed up. And so, I don't know. I just don't like it. It's probably my least favorite line in the movie.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't bug me, because it is one of those things where it's like, you know, you have those moments with your family where, you know, everybody's imperfect.
Right.
And, you know, you're still going to say stuff like that. You know, you're a great dad. You're a great mom. Even if there have been plenty of times where they have proven otherwise, but it still is one of those things that you say just to kind of like make them feel better. And so, yeah, I guess I end up reading it that way, and I end up having less of an issue with it. Because, I mean, you know, Thor also, I mean, he is a very forgiving guy. I mean, you know, he ends up having a great relationship still after this film with Loki that they kind of continue. And when you see them in Ragnarok, you know, and they're having those conversations about, you know, how they've always kind of interacted with each other, I feel like there's something about Thor, and this is something I love about the character, is that he is so willing to kind of look past those faults in those people, particularly his family, and acknowledge the positive qualities in them, and, you know, the good in them. And I think there's an element of, you know, amplifying the good in their conversations helps them kind of maybe move past some of the bad and focus on the good themselves as they kind of continue forward. So I think there's an interesting element in the way that Thor does that I find. So, yeah.
Because the way it was framed, I didn't have this takeaway, but thinking about like how that scene happens in their life, I imagine Odin is probably standing there mourning the loss of Loki as well. And we don't get to see that because it's focused on Thor, but like, you know, the stoic father staring off into the ether and just like lost in his own thoughts. If we had maybe like a second of seeing Odin mourning, or seeing like a teary eye, single eye, Odin, maybe the takeaway from that scene could have been a brighter takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think because, like, and this is where I'm between you two, because I feel like if we'd gotten that scene that you're talking about, Will, and maybe even just a little of like, I mean, Odin saying, "Was this my fault?" I think would be way too cheesy and over the and lampshading. But if we'd gotten any of that, then Andy, the take you're taking, I think would be perfectly understandable. I'm missing that, and you know, and it may be that I think that Odin's a much worse father than the scriptwriters do, which is always just kind of an interesting dynamic there. Well, and so let's shift to the other dynamic that I think is definitely happening here, which is because we're talking now about Thor being a wise king, and Thor's saying, like, you were so wise. He may be trying to make his father feel better, but I feel like that the subtext here is completely about what Odin did to Thor, and that this is Thor saying, like, you were a wise king to better prepare your heir, and you were a good father to give your son the kick in the butt he needed to go through some growth. Am I wrong there, or is that what you also take out of part of what the dynamic between these two right here?
Well, I think the element about wisdom is that, it takes time and experience. And I think when Odin says to his son, you'll be a wise king, it's because Thor, there has been this sign of growth. He's gone through a hard time, and he's humble about it and learning from his experiences and his mistakes. And so I think there's something interesting there. And I also think it's interesting when Thor kind of starts talking to him about, there'll never be a wiser king than you, how Odin kind of, he stops just looking off in the distance and kind of looks down, almost like, I don't know, I guess I read it as thinking about all of the things that he has done. And again, it's headcanoning. I'm looking way beyond the context of this film into thinking about all the stuff that he had done with Hela and all of the mistakes that he has made in his past and with family decisions and ruler decisions, and thinking about all of the choices that he's made as a king. And I don't know, I part of me is like, when Thor says there will never be a king as wise as you, part of me is like Odin feeling like, you don't even know the half of it. I'm nowhere near what I could have been. And it's one of those moments where it's like, you don't say that because you want, I don't know, I guess I read it as like Odin wanting Thor to believe that he could be wiser than Odin and think that he could actually be better, because I think Odin, I don't know, I find the way that he lowers his head in that moment kind of a little bit of an acknowledgement, like, I'm not as wise as you think I am. Yeah.
So you don't think there's any, like, you don't think that Thor is referring to, like, the decision that Odin made to banish him here? That's not a kind of subtext of this conversation?
I suppose, like, that's one of the elements that there is, like, the fact that you banished me, that was a wise decision, and it was a hard decision, and it was an emotional decision, I think there is an element of that in all of kind of everything that he's saying here. So acknowledging that it was the right decision. I think that's what Thor is saying in that, you made the right decision. It was hard for me, but I did learn.
And so we kind of end with Thor saying, I have much to learn. I know that. And there you definitely do get the sense that Odin is listening, that Odin, they're really kind of like tied into each other there. Any other kind of any thoughts on that kind of the last little bit of the moment we get there?
I think we make this minute deeper by our headcanon than the product that we got, but it's not a bad minute.
It's funny, Will. I was really kind of struck by your comment, because I feel like certainly over the last 6 months of analyzing this movie, I have the sense that Thor has gone on this epic Shakespearean incredible journey. And I have to remind myself, I didn't like this movie when it first came out.
Yeah.
When I first saw it. And I do wonder if, and maybe this is because it's brilliantly subtle filmmaking, or maybe because it needed to be less subtle. I feel like I have such a stronger appreciation for this movie, and I see all these things because I did this minute by minute analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But it also does make me wonder, if you have to do minute by minute analysis of a movie, does it count? If you have to see it in that kind of So yeah, it's an interesting question. But yeah, I think it's very helpful perspective to hear that you're not as sold on that as Andy or I may have been.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It was funny. I mean, watching you say that, I saw this look of puzzlement on Andy's face.
Yeah, and he's like, "Are you sure we're watching the same movie?" I'm like, "Yes, yes." I didn't feel the same way.
It's fair. It's fair.
Absolutely, no, it is.
Well, and that's actually kind of a fun way to kind of wrap up, Will, because I know you've been talking about your love of Marvel and your love of Thor. What was your first reaction? Well, first, what was your thought when you heard this was going to become a movie? But also, what was your reaction to it?
My thought when I heard it was going to be a movie, I was skeptically excited, because, at this moment in time, we've got Hulk and we've got Iron Man, basically. And both science-y, just, 2 steps beyond real science, just kind of flashy, grounded Earth movies. And the idea that within this same world, we could introduce gods and one of the many pantheons that are in Marvel. How is that going to happen? So I was very intrigued with the idea, and I was very interested to see how this was going to play out. When the castings were announced, and then when I watched it, I wasn't as excited about everything. For those who can't see me, I am half Black, half Asian, and I'm all about representation. However, I was not huge on making Heimdall Black, and I wasn't big on making Hogan a very strong accented Asian man. Because I felt like when you're telling a movie on Norse mythology, this is your one excuse to whitewash your pantheon and get away with it, for lack of a better phrase. And you could have made Selvig or Darcy minorities. That was my takeaway at the time, especially with I mentioned this yesterday, 2 days ago, with making the bouncer black. Because Heimdall is, he's the guy at the door. And so when I first watched this, 11 years ago, that was my takeaway, and I was kind of upset about it. And I wasn't a very big fan of this movie as well, but it ages fine. And like, Idris Elba is an amazing actor, and he got his time. After he got a bigger name, they took his helmet off and gave him more face to show. And it was fine. I'm still not a fan of Hogan, but honestly, with the MCU in its infinite phase at this point, I kind of got over it.
Yeah.
After I watched this movie, I was like, okay, well, let's see how Captain America does. I don't know, man. This might not be great.
Yeah.
But yeah, coming back later, my complaints were more of just like stomping my feet, little tantrums. They weren't. I don't think they're really grounded in anything very good.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a very fair analysis, especially about race and stuff. And like, I remember thinking, like, I like that they're trying to make Asgard, that it was the very, very white Scandinavia of 10th century's memories of the Norse, perhaps, were that they're all similar to Scandinavians and that actually they're different. Like, I like that concept. But also, yeah, the more I think about how Heimdall is, he doesn't go to the feasts. He's not part of Asgard itself. He's off on the edges. As you said, the bouncer, there's a certain, like, eh.
You're right.
And I when you said, like, could you have cast different people? I'm now very curious to see a what if where the scientist who trains Jane is played by Idris Elba. And granted, you lose all the, like, I grew up, like, maybe he still grew up with Norse mythology, and Idris Elba is such a talented actor. I don't imagine how he could pull off that kind of nebbishy, like, but I'd love to see him try. So that's a fun thought. All right, well, thank you as always so much for being here. Andy, thank you so much for doing all you do to make this happen. And to our fans, you're why we do this. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Bye.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.